Welcome to the module for a tiered approach to accessibility part 1. I'm Lori Morris, Director of Special Assessment Design for the Assessment, Accountability, and Data Governance Department. This module will cover accessibility supports, history of accommodations, who is eligible, selecting accommodations, the purpose of accommodations, key considerations, and the medical exemption request process. Accessibility supports can be thought of in a tiered approach. The first is test administration conditions. These are conditions such as timing, scheduling, setting, and locations. These test administration conditions are applicable to any student in the school building. Accessibility features for all students are also available to any student in order to access content, and we'll discuss what is considered an accessibility feature for all students further in this module. Accommodations are reserved for students with disabilities and English learners. An English learner eligible to receive an accommodation includes any English learner who is also in the transition 1 through the transition 4 years. Please reference the Test Administration Manual for a comprehensive list of test administration conditions, accessibility features for all, and a full list of accommodations for students with disabilities and English learners. A brief history of accommodations. Prior to IDEA and No Child Left Behind, all students were not always included in the assessment process. The focus on accommodations has shifted from an quote, anything goes approach for inclusion to ensuring valid measurement of student achievement. This is a very dramatic shift where we no longer think of accommodations as a menu of options available, but we rather focus on those individual student characteristics that identify a need for an accommodation. Federal regulations stipulate that states have policies on appropriate accommodations, monitor those policies, and ensure valid measurements. The department conducts accommodation audits each year after the conclusion of the test window to ensure a match between any accommodation chosen versus the student's IEP or 504 plan. So, who is eligible to receive an accommodation? Students eligible for accommodations include students with disabilities served under an individualized education plan and students with disabilities served under Section 504. This also includes students who may have a temporary injury that presents itself right before the test window happens. English learners are also eligible to receive accommodations, and these are defined as students qualifying for English language services, English learners who are also classified as a student with a disability, and students who have exited English language services within the last 4 years. These are classified as students within the T1 through T4 transition phase. When we select accommodations, we must review pertinent information about accommodations, meaning what are accommodations, and more importantly, what are they not, and who is eligible to receive an accommodation. We must always review the Tennessee policy regarding accommodation use. This is especially important as we consider the different tests that students will be participating in during the school year. Not all test accommodations are applicable to every type of assessment where the student will participate. Accommodations always grow out of the content and skills measured by the assessment and the purpose of the assessment. Teams and committees should consider the purpose and content of the assessment as well as the individual student's need and circumstance when selecting accommodations. Inappropriate use of accommodations can and does negatively impact student achievement. For example, during the math assessment, there is a section that is a non-calculator section for math. A student may not use a calculator on that particular section because doing so would invalidate the purpose and the content of that assessment. Accommodations allow access. When we think about access, we think about practices and procedures in the areas of presentation, response, setting, and scheduling that provide equitable instructional and assessment access for students with disabilities and English learners. Accommodations reduce or eliminate the effect of a student's disability or limited English proficiency. An accommodation does not provide an unfair advantage, and accommodations do not reduce or change the learning expectations. And an accommodation provides access. This access is for the student to demonstrate his or her achievement. Again, an accommodation allows the student to participate in the assessment. It does not guarantee proficiency, and accommodations should not be selected solely as a means to help ensure proficiency. An accommodation must be required by the student in order to participate in the assessment. An accommodation is not something that begins and ends during the test window. This accommodation must be provided during routine instruction and assessment in the classroom, both before and after the state tests are administered. In Tennessee, accommodations may not alter, explain, simplify, paraphrase, or eliminate any test item, reading passage, writing prompt, or choice option. An accommodation may not provide verbal or other clues or suggestions that hint at or give away the correct response to the student. We do offer an accessibility support that eliminates answer choices. However, this is a way for the student to visually cross out a response option. It does not remove the choices presented to the student. The student simply X's out a choice option that he has eliminated. Again, different tests serve different purposes. For example, the grade 2 assessment does not have the same allowable accommodations as grades 3 through 8. Access for ELLs is another example that has different accommodation choices than TN Ready. We cannot generalize accommodations amongst different tests. We have to provide accommodations for the student based on that test purpose and the student needs. So finally, when considering an accommodation, consider the purpose of the test and what it is designed to measure. We must match the right student to the right tool. To do this, we need to think about the student characteristics, if it's the disability, language proficiency, or both, and how those characteristics interact with the specific content area. Decisions should be made individually, and these decisions can differ by content area based on need. For students with disabilities, we should consider the characteristics of the disability or the combination of disabilities for the individual student. We must think about how the disability affects and impacts the learning of specific content and how the disability affects and impacts the demonstration of learning. For English learners, we should consider the student's level of English proficiency, the student's level of literacy in English. We also must consider the student's level of native language proficiency and the student's level of literacy in native language. For example, If we have an English learner who is not proficient in his native language, a word-to-word dictionary would not provide the English learner with access because he is not proficient in his native language. So we have to consider both native language proficiency and English proficiency. For English learners who also have a disability, we have to consider all of the previous needs. We have to consider the disability needs, the language acquisition needs, and probably a combination of both. The IEP team should include a language service teacher to help make these appropriate decisions. These services should be coordinated. For all students, we should consider the student's need for the accommodation, the student's experience with the accommodation after the accommodation was provided, whether the accommodation was a benefit to the student, and the student's feelings and beliefs about the accommodation. We must help the student begin to advocate for the types of accommodation that he needs. Districts may apply for medical exemptions for a student with a documented severe medical circumstance. An example is a student who is undergoing chemotherapy treatments for leukemia. If the district believes the student's current medical needs warrant a medical exemption, the district must follow the medical exemption process as outlined in the Test Administration Manual. The medical exemption request form posted here must include an uploaded doctor's statement that outlines why the medical condition precludes a student from participating in the assessment. A medical exemption should only be reserved for very unique circumstances for a student with a severe medical condition. This concludes this module. Part 2 will be presented live at the Spring 2018 Regional Assessment Meetings. Please visit the Assessment Logistics course site and complete the assessment on the tiered approach to accessibility.